Hey everybody, and I just want to take a few minutes and talk to you about this next piece of the method section in our research projects. And we want to talk about the participants. So we're going to talk about who is going to be part of our study. Now, sorry, it's not advancing the way I want it to. Okay, so who will our participants look like? Well, they might look like a classroom full of kids in a regular traditional classroom. They might look like a class like in the middle, a PE class. We have several of you that working with students in PE. It might be children in the nurse's office. So they're all in school-related environment somehow. They're just different places. But they're all going to be what we're going to call intact groups, and where they're all convenience samples. If you watch the video, the first video, she talked about, the most common type of sample uses the convenience sample because it's convenient. And that's what we're going to be used. We're using these convenience samples, and a lot of them are intact groups because we're not able to randomly select them into a certain class or a certain school or anything like that. If you're taking tally marks and that kind of thing, that's kind of a random, you don't know who's going to come to the office and when they're going to come to the office, nurse's office and all that. But if you're working in classroom, okay, you're going to use those intact classroom groups, and they're all actually going to be convenience samples when we're doing our action research. That's part of what makes action research different than experimental research. Because in action research, we are testing, we are going through the process of data-driven professional development is really what we're doing. And so we want to see, if I do this driven by the data, how is that going, how is this situation or whatever maybe going to improve or change? All right, so our participants are who we have right here immediately in front of us. We don't go out and call for people like you see on TV commercials or on radio ads, we're looking for individuals between 18 and 25 who don't smoke, et cetera, to be part of a research study. If you're interested, call this number or go to this website. Okay, it's nothing like that. We use who we have available. Okay? Because we want to see, we want what we do to directly impact those students, those people that we work with every single day. That's the goal of our action research. Okay, it's data-driven professional development or personal improvement, if you want to call it that as well. Okay, so let's see if we can get this. Oh, it worked this time. Didn't work last time. Good. So here is kind of a draft maybe. This is not a draft. This is kind of, here's what should be in the participant section, and it's written as a participant section. Now, there's one problem on this slide, and I'm going to let you look at it a moment and see if you can possibly pick it out. It's the very first thing you see, and it's the header. And we'll talk about headings and stuff when we format the final paper. But participants should be not italicized, and it should be in bold. It's correct to be placed on the left-hand side, but for what we're going to do, it's a second level heading, so it will need to be left-centered or left-aligned, bold, not italicized. Okay, so mark that down. But, okay, so as we read through this little paragraph, the participant section is going to tell us who participated in the research. So how many were there? Any basic demographic information, how many boys, how many girls, their ethnicity, if it's relevant to what you're doing, range of ages or the average age, any socioeconomic status, anything that is relative to your study. So like, okay, the one it says in here, relationship status. It doesn't matter. We're working with kids. Okay, so no. Sexual orientation. It doesn't matter. We're working with kids. All right, we're not trying to answer those kinds of questions. So only use the demographics that are relevant to this, to the subject, the participants that you're working with. So yes, age, race, or age, ethnicity, I should say, and gender would probably be the three that we'd really want to look at. All right, and then we want to go ahead and we want to further describe them for where they're from. Now, I've said it a couple times. We don't want to be so specific that we say this school. They're from this school. Okay, but we want to say maybe the Midwest United States, whatever, and we'll look at a couple examples here in a minute where you see how that's done. Now, pardon me, how did they get assigned to groups? You know, did you randomly assign them? You know, did you decide the fourth graders were going to be your experimental group and why? And then so the third graders were your control group and why? And you know, why are they comparable? So that's what another thing we need to know. Why are the groups comparable? What makes them similar? And then any incentives? Were they assured that, okay, if you help me with this, there's, you know, grades aren't affected or anything like that? Are there any other important aspects, like do you have a lot of English language learners, non-English speakers, those that are special needs, students with disabilities? I mean, what have you got? What makes your sample unique? And you know, the uniqueness of the sample can sometimes affect the results. So that's why we want to describe richly. We want to richly describe who our participants are. And maybe you had to exclude some participants, like somebody took the pretest, but on the day you gave a post-test, they were absent. So you had to throw that out because you didn't have the scores to compare. So you know, one student or two students were there for pretest, but not for the post-test. So that way, that means I only had, instead of 28, I had 26 that actually did the whole study. So, because that's going to affect your results in the end. So, any criteria that tells us who's included, why they're included, and is important for the results that will be reported later. Okay, so we want to richly describe who participates in our study, so that when we start analyzing and reporting results, it makes sense. The data makes sense together. Okay, so if you say up here in this participant section that there were 28 participants, then when we start talking about results, I should see you talking about 28 participants' results. So that's why up here in participants, you can tell me, I started with 28 because of such and such, such and such, I ended up with whatever. Okay, if that changes. It might not, but it might. So let's look at a couple. I think I have 3 or 4 examples here. Okay. So the first one is from a university psychology course. And if we look at it, it says a total of 60 students. And then we put in parentheses, 30 male, 30 female. You could put male equal 30, comma, female equal 30. Okay. If you look in your APA manual, I think it shows you how to report that statistic. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but I believe there's a diagram there that will show you. Okay, so total of 60 students who were enrolled in an introductory psychology course at a Northeastern university. Okay, so I know it's at a university somewhere in the Northeast. That's enough to tell me. Okay. They were ethnically diverse freshmen or sophomores who ranged in age from 18 to 24 years. Now, I would have liked to have seen maybe a little more breakout of the ethnic diversity. because that may play a factor in the rest of the study. Now, it might not. It might not be important to the topic at hand, but then again, it might be. So I would really like to see that broken out. So over on the right, it talks about a little more about, okay, so this is the participants section. So this is what should be in it. Who participated, how many participated, how they were selected, and any important characteristics. So that's kind of an easy way to remember what this section should be about. And if you notice, it's 3 sentences long. Could be as short as a paragraph. All right. The next two were taken from students' work in previous semesters of the methods course. All right. So the one on the left, as you're seeing it, talks about how it was a student working with English language learners. Okay? So it took place in a 5th grade classroom. Tells morning class of how many students, but she's only choosing to use 4, and it says why, and then it talks a little bit about the first student, and talks a little about the second student, and the third student, and the 4th student. So I have enough information that when she starts talking about the results in the end, I don't know, I can't pick out, I wouldn't be able to walk in and pick this kid out from anybody in the room. Okay? But I just know she's got boys, she's got girls, and kind of how they're doing in the class. So she's richly described her participants. Okay, the next one, same thing. Okay, we've got a 5th grade general education course with 19 students. Our students are from a diverse economic background. There's 13 males, 6 females. Okay. Because the SES didn't really play a factor in what she was looking at, she focused more instead of their ELL and their maybe their needs, special needs. All right, and then just a little qualification of what she's been, we've been doing math strategies, but we're still uncomfortable with word problems. That's really not necessary in the participant section, but I didn't say, nope, that doesn't work. Okay, but it says who participated, how many. Okay. One thing that's probably missing is how those students were selected, so we need that. And then any important characteristics. So she talks about the important characteristics of those students. And so on the next slide, we want to just kind of break it down. Now, this is a little longer participant section. That's several paragraphs. Yours might, depending on who your participants are. It could be 1 paragraph. It could be 2 paragraphs. However many you need to really richly describe who's taking place in your research. So if you look, that first sentence. The study began with an intact group of 40 master's degree students, and then it says 36 women, 4 men enrolled. Okay, so what kind of group was it? It's an intact group. And that intact group is there to say that they were chosen because that was the class they were in. I didn't have any control over what course they were put in. Okay, so I just had to take them as a whole. They were intact. And then where did the study take place? So who were they? Intact group. They were in an EdTech program at a small regional university in the Midwest United States. So we kind of know where they're at, the general area, but we don't know specifically. We haven't said at Missouri Southern State University or at Baker University. No, it's just, okay, general, an idea, because there actually could be a difference in students in the Midwest versus students on the East Coast or the West Coast. So that's why that is included there. All right, now, the next one talks about how, or one student, okay, well, I started with 40, and then one male dropped the course, and so I only have 39 participants. Okay, so, went blank for a second. So I said, okay, so it started with 40, but for some reason one of them left, and so now I'm down to 39. There's that statement of, okay, I had to exclude somebody. Not everybody's included that I started out with. And then any demographic information, that's all there. And I even, you're going to find, okay, so yeah, this is participant section for my paper. Because I keep saying I because I can't remove myself from it. All right, so there's a table here. Because my sample was a little, I won't say convoluted, but it's kind of easier to see those demographics in using a table. So we included a table here so that a reader can say, oh yeah, I see. You've got two different sections of the course and here's how they break down. And then that's described in the narrative as well. And we go down and we still talk a little bit more about, okay, we've got two sections, when it was, how many are in one section, how many were in the other section, because that makes a difference later on. And then the last paragraph here on the page talks about everybody did the instructional strategies, but not everybody was required to do the surveys or the interviews, so they could opt out if they wanted to. And so kind of talking about that is more important information because we need to know at the end that's going to affect the results. Because, and it's not on this page, actually this participant section goes on for one more page, but it talks about, okay, the students, they were invited to participate and they could participate if they wanted to, but there was no penalty if they didn't. And so it goes on the next page to talk about how many chose to and how many didn't, so how that affected my final overall number of participants. All right. So yours is probably not going to be this extensive. It'll look more like what we saw on the page before. Probably a paragraph, maybe two. But I wanted to use this as just as an example to kind of talk about these things on the left. You know, you need to include what kind of a group is it? Where did this, where did it take place? Was there some reason you didn't include anybody? I also wanted you to see that it's okay maybe to put in a table. Use a visual within this section if you want to. And then always include any specific information that your reader needs to know that might impact the results. Okay, so remember, we want our participants to match our results when we start talking about participants and the results. So really, the biggest thing about this section is that we just want to richly describe who is participating in our study. Now, we don't have to get so specific that we talk about the whole school population. I could have talked about there were 7,457 students enrolled at the university. Of those, 5,000 some were undergraduates and 2,562 were graduate students, etc. That's good information, but it's not relevant. It doesn't have anything to do specifically or directly impacting what my study was. When we looked at the previous, and let's go back to that, looked at these previous examples. We could have talked about the student here on the left about the 5th grade classroom, the morning class of 23. She could have broken down about all 23 of her students, but she didn't because they weren't part of what she was doing. She just talked about the 4 that she was working with. So it all hinges on who specifically participates in your study. Might be school nurses, might be a classroom of PE kids, might be a music class, might be regular education teachers in the school. So, if you do something surrounding teachers or adults, you might want to talk about their level of education and those kind of things as well, if you think that might be relevant and give our description some richness to it. So, the participants piece of your research project is who specifically is taking part in your research, and you're going to describe them so that when I read the participants, I say, okay, I see who's doing this, and that matches what they're telling me about when they share their results. Okay, so let's work on richly describing who is part of our study.